Good morning, Professor. Today we are going to dive into one of the most landmark cases in Canadian contract law, Ron Engineering and Construction Eastern Limited, the Queen in Right of the Ontario. This case set a significant precedent in public procurement and the law of tendering. In this presentation, we will walk through the background facts, the legal issue involved, the plaintiff and defendant position, the final decision by the Supreme Court, and the rationale behind it. The decision reshaped how bid submission and contract are understood in Canada and is essential for everyone involved in procurement or contract management. In this case, Ron Engineering submitted a tender to the Government of Ontario for a construction project. After submission, they realized a clerical error in their bid. They had mistakenly omitted over 750,000, drastically underpricing their offer. Upon realizing this mistake, they immediately attempted to withdraw their bid and requested the return of their bid deposit. However, the government refused to return the deposit and accepted the next lowest bidder instead. This raised the legal question of whether a binding contract had already been formed through the act of submitting the bid. This dispute led to a case that made its way to the Supreme Court.
To continue with the facts, it's important to understand the context of how public tenders were handled at the time. Before this case, bids were generally seen as mere offers that did not form any legal obligations until formally accepted. This meant that contractors were withdraw their bids before official acceptance without penalty. Ron Engineering based their legal stance on this traditional understanding. They argued that since their error was identified and communicated before acceptance, they should not be penalized. However, the government believed the bid was bidding upon submission and sought to retain the deposit as compensation for the withdrawal. Road Engineering, as the plaintiff, maintained that no bidding contract was formed upon submitting the bid. They argued that based on long-standing contract law principles, a tender submission was an offer, not an agreement, and it only became binding once accepted. Furthermore, they pointed out that error in the bidding had been disclosed prior to any acceptance, which under conventional rules would allow them to withdraw. They believed the legal framework before 1981 supported their right to recover the deposit. Their position emphasized that legal obligations should only arise when both parties had formally agreed upon the terms, which they believed had not occurred.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Harshprit Kaur. I will be talking about the issues of this case. The core legal issue in this case was whether a contract referred to as Contract A was formed the moment a compliant bid was submitted. The court needed to decide if Ron Engineering's bid submission itself constituted a binding agreement that prevented withdrawal even in the case of clerical error. Another critical issue was whether forfeiting the bid deposit was a lawful and fair consequence of attempting to withdraw a tender. This case forced the court to re examine how public procurement functions and whether traditional contract principles applied in the same way to tendering process involving public institutions. In addition to the main issue of whether Contract A was formed upon bid submission, the case raised broader implications. For example, how should errors in bids be treated in legal terms? Should a mistake, if identified promptly, absolve the broader legal consequences? Another key question was how much control and discretion the procuring authority should have in dealing with tender errors. This case also examined the fairness of holding bidders strictly liable under public tender rules and whether new legal standards should govern these complex competitive procurement processes. The outcome would redefine bid law in Canada.
The Supreme Court of the Canada ruled against Ron Engineer. It held that a binding contract known as a Contract A was formed when a complaint bid was submitted in a response to the tender. Therefore, Ron Engineer could not withdraw its bid after submission. Even a clerical clerical error occurred as a result. they are forfeited their deposit. The decision changed how tenders are interpreted in Canada. It emphasized that the tendering process itself can form a contract which obliges the bidder to honor their proposal. This holding introduced strictly responsibility for the contractor and enhanced the integrity of the bidding process. Rationale for this case. The rationale behind the court decision focused on the protecting the integrity of the tender system. The Supreme Court reasoned that allowing bidders to withdraw after submission would undermine the fairness and competitiveness of the public procurement. The ruling clarified the submitting a complaint bid in a response to a formal call for a tender creates contractual obligations, specifically Contract A, which binds both parties to the rule of the process. The rationale helps maintain confidence in government contract and ensures all bidders are treated fairly. The decision highlighted that even honest mistakes like clerical error do not release bidder from their contractual duties.
Now we are examining the fact issue and the ruling in details. Let's summarize the case and understand its broader impact on the contract law and procedure practices. This allows your audience to mentally prepare for the takeaway points, and you can engage them with a question like what do you think, should a bidder be held to their mistake if it was reported before acceptance. This encourage reflection and dialogues. Slide number 10, case summary. To summarize, Ron Engineering v. the Queen was landmark case that rehabs the public trading in Canada. The case began with a clerical mistake in a bid submission and resulted in the loss of substantial deposit. The Supreme Court ruled that a contract is formed when a complaint bid is submitted, not just when it's accepted. This introduction, the two contract model, contract A bid submission and contract B project agreement. The outcome established the principle that the bid submission carry legal weight and reinforced the accountability in enforcement. It remains a key prediction in Canadian contract and construction law.
Questions and answers. What was the main legal issue in Ron Engineering v. the Queen? Whether binding contract A is formed when a contractor submits a bid in response to a call for tenders, and whether forfeiture of the bid deposit was justified. What triggered the dispute? Ron Engineering submitted a tender with a clerical error that led to a much lower bid. They tried to withdraw the bid after submission, leading to the legal conflict. What are Contract A and Contract B in tendering law? Contract A is formed when a conflict bid is submitted and includes the tender process rules. Contract B is the actual construction contract awarded to the successful bidder. What was the Supreme Court of Canada's decision? The court ruled that Contract A was formed upon bid submission and Ron Engineering was not allowed to withdraw. Forfeiture of the bid deposit was upheld. Why is this case significant in Canadian law? It established the two contract analysis, Contract A, Contract B, in procurement law, shaping how public tendering is interpreted across Canada. Conclusion. In terms of contract law, the Ron Engineering and Construction Eastern Ltd v. the Queen and Right of Ontario case set a major precedent, especially with regards to the tendering procedure. A binding contract is created when a complaint bid is submitted according to the Supreme Court of Canada. This contract initials the bidder's commitment to honor its tender and the tendering authority obligation to take the bid into consideration. This case made it clear that the bid deposit could be destroyed if a bid is withdrawn after it has been submitted. Fairness and legal accountability. in were ensured by the ruling, which strengthened the competitive bidding process. In the end, the decision has shaped Canadian contract interpretation and enforcement with long-lasting effects on both public and private tendering procedure.